Ladies and gentlemen, what is hate speech? Who decides what hate speech is? Is hate speech protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution? Are you putting people in physical harm by disagreeing with them? Because that's what some people will say. And if you put something insulting or false on social media, should you go to jail? And by the way, did Jesus ever insult anyone? We're going to cover those questions today, and I have a special guest who I'll introduce here in a minute. But the question I just asked a second ago, if you put something insulting or false on social media, should you go to jail? Well, in Germany, yeah, you can go to jail for putting something insulting or false on social media. And this was a piece done on 60 Minutes, the CBS News program, just this past Sunday. It's about a 20-minute or so discussion of the laws that are in place in Germany and what can happen if you're in Germany and you put something that the government thinks is false or insulting. You can actually go to jail. And what I want to play for you here is just a 60-second clip from that 60 Minutes piece. You'll hear the 60 Minutes interview ask these three government representatives questions about what happens if somebody posts something false on social media or something insulting. Here it is.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish. But if you in the internet, if I insult you or a politician,
That sticks around forever.
yeah.
The prosecutors explain German law also prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, and fake quotes.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
The punishment for breaking hate speech laws can include jail time for repeat offenders.
Imagine going to jail because the government didn't like something you put on social media. That's where Germany is right now. And that's why Vice President J.D. Vance was spot on with his speech he gave about a week ago over there that had the European leaders in a fit, because he was actually speaking the truth, that they call themselves a democracy, but the democracy does not actually protect free speech. And to discuss this with us today is our friend Dr. Owen Anderson, all the way from Arizona State University. We've had Owen on a couple of times before. He's embroiled in a bit of a dispute with his own university over free speech, and another free speech controversy came up recently he's going to tell us about. So here he is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Dr. Owen Anderson. Owen, great having you back on the program here again. The I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist program. First, let me get your reaction to what you saw there on the 60 Minutes piece.
Yeah, well, it's always great to be with you, Frank. And it's almost unbelievable. You almost think that's a Saturday Night Live skit.
That's right.
Right? Because you wonder, do you guys hear yourselves? Mm-hmm. Insulting somebody is now illegal, because the question is, who defines insult? Is it merely subjective? We have to figure out how badly you hurt the other person's feelings? Or is there really going to be a government panel that sits around looking through social media and says, no, this one's insulting and this one's not?
That's what's going on. And I think the history, of course, of Germany has them trying to avoid what they think would be another Holocaust, because I know some of their laws say, well, you can't deny the Holocaust. You can't express any support for any sort of Nazi ideology. I understand the sentiment behind that.
Yeah.
But it does create another problem. In fact, one of the comments on the 60 Minutes YouTube piece, by the way, you can go to YouTube and watch the whole 60 Minutes piece. The most liked comment from one of the viewers of this fiasco of the government actually telling you what you can and can't say is a very short sentence. And here is the sentence: fighting imaginary fascism with actual fascism.
Right.
They think they're stopping fascism by being fascists themselves.
Well, it goes way beyond just not talking about the Holocaust. I remember I had a really interesting discussion on an airplane one time with a Sony executive, and his job was to design games that made it through different countries' ethics laws. So like in Saudi Arabia, they have different laws than in Germany. So there are Call of Duty games where they had to alter them to not have any Nazi references. So that's one thing, but this is just any insult. You're getting fined and maybe even jail time.
And who defines what an insult is?
Yeah, well, what I posted after I heard this on Twitter was I said, if you go on German social media and you post, "There is no God," do you get arrested for lying? Because that's a lie. There is a God. So they're not going to catch you on that one. It's going to be what they think counts as a lie.
Another upped comment on this feed, this YouTube video from 60 Minutes was this: two foreigners meet, an American and a German. The American says, "In our country, I can stand in front of the White House and shout, 'Down with the president,' and nothing will happen to me." The German joins in and says, "In our country, it's the same. I can stand in front of the Reichstag and shout, 'Down with Donald Trump,' and nothing will happen to me."
Yep, that's right. Well, that's what's interesting is I keep track on social media of ASU professors who post just as private citizens, but they are professors at ASU, and they post about how either Donald Trump or Elon Musk are Nazis. And it's interesting to me because basically that's just an appeal to emotions because everybody agrees Nazis are terrible. And so if you can link your opponent to that, you win the argument. But these are philosophy professors sometimes trained in logic. And you just wonder what happened. Is this really what Trump derangement syndrome is? They just simply have gone out of their minds and they think this is Nazism. This is the first fascist government in human history then that wanted a smaller government.
Yeah, a smaller government that is so transparent. They're telling you everything they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump seems to have a press conference every day. I mean, he's had more press conferences in 4 weeks than Biden had in 4 years. I mean,
yeah, right. Well, and I asked one of the professors, I decided to comment. I wanted to keep it respectful, but I just said, he posted that picture of Elon when everyone on the left said, well, he's doing the Nazi salute. And so I posted a picture of Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, a couple others all doing the same gesture because the camera just catches you at that moment.
Right.
And then you can say, oh, that's a Nazi salute. And his argument was this. The picture of Elon proves he's a Nazi. These pictures don't prove that because they're not Nazis. But we already know Elon's a Nazi. So
okay.
You're a logic professor. How do you do this?
Now, are these people in your own department, Owen?
Well, no, mostly they're across ASU. A couple might be in my department, but there's other philosophy departments at ASU. There's, I'm in the humanities department, and there's actually technically a philosophy department. So yeah, there's a lot of us at ASU, but College Fix did a study in the fall, and they could only find 19 Republicans. So it was something like 3% of ASU's faculty.
Okay. This is Arizona State University, ladies and gentlemen. This is a state-funded university. And
currently the largest state university in the country. We have 180,000 students.
And only 3% are Republicans. For all those professors who sit around the faculty lounge talking about diversity, right. I'd want to ask them, how many Republicans do you have in your departments? You're all about diversity. You don't have any.
It all stops at their definition because it's they say that their value is that we as a faculty represent the communities we serve. So let's say 30% of the community is Hispanic. They would expect 30% of the faculty to also be Hispanic. But here in Phoenix, it's like something like 75% of people in Phoenix are either Roman Catholic, Protestant, or Mormon. That's not true among the faculty.
No, not at all. We got a lot more with Dr. Owen Anderson and hate speech and insults. And we're going to see that actually Jesus wasn't as kind as you think he was. There's also been a controversy going on at ASU that we're going to uncover as well. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, back in 2 minutes. What is hate speech, ladies and gentlemen? Actually, hate speech is anything that we don't like, people will say. That's the problem. When you start defining hate speech by just whoever is in power doesn't like what you say, then you don't have a country that allows free speech. And it's going on in Europe. It's going on particularly in Germany. That's just come to the surface today. In fact, I don't know if you saw this either, Dr. Owen Anderson, we're talking to right now here from Arizona State University. Dr. Anderson, I don't know if you saw the interview that I think her name is Margaret Brennan. She is a talking head, a anchor for CBS News, and she had Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and she was saying essentially that free speech led to the Holocaust. How is she wrong? How couldn't she be more wrong, Dr. Anderson?
That's what's so baffling to figure out in her mind. How did that make sense? Because that would have been one of the most restrictive and totalitarian governments ever, with no freedoms.
And that's what it was. I mean, they were the ones that stopped free speech.
Yep.
Someone, I think it was Justice Brandeis, who said sunlight is the best disinfectant. And the answer to bad speech, or what you might consider hate speech, is free speech, more speech.
Well, this is why it's really important for your audience to understand. They might be parents with potential college students, or you might be college students listening, and you need to know that the secular academy's approach right now to Christianity is to try to label it as hate speech. So when we're talking about hate speech right now, we're not talking about somebody getting super angry and swearing at another person. We're talking about just saying that another person is in sin and needs redemption through Christ. That's hate speech.
Yeah, that distinction needs to be clearly drawn. Because I would argue, I don't think it's right to insult somebody who doesn't deserve an insult, because Jesus insulted people. We'll get to it later. I don't think it's right to belittle people unnecessarily. I don't think it's right to be aggressive with people or to incite violence. We all would agree with that. Yep. And we would even agree that in our country, there are some limits on free speech. Classically, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater if there is indeed no fire, because then people are going to get trampled to death. So yes, there are limits, but disagreeing with someone is not one of those limits. If we say that disagreement is hate, which unfortunately many on the left think that if you disagree with leftist ideology or leftist principles or leftist thoughts, somehow you're a hater.
Yep.
First of all, that doesn't make any sense. But secondly, that is not a free speech environment then. So how do we educate people on this, Dr. Anderson? What do we say to them when they say you're a hater, you're engaged in hate speech?
Well, that's one reason I want to help parents become aware of how bad it is at university campuses. And I don't know if you saw that Alex O'Connor did a clip a couple days ago with Richard Dawkins. And in the clip, Richard Dawkins was saying that you really have to evaluate what Jesus said, because he says a couple good things, but then he says a couple terrible things, including that someone was born in sin. And Alex O'Connor, who's an atheist, tries to say, well, maybe couldn't that just mean something like we're all born with the predilection to sin or something? He gives Richard Dawkins a chance to say, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. And Richard Dawkins doesn't take it. He says, no, that's why philosophy is not a real discipline. He dismisses the entire discipline of philosophy because Alex O'Connor suggests there may be another way to understand Jesus. So that's the animosity they have against the words of Jesus. It's not like the old days where you would have an atheist who says Jesus was one of the great moral thinkers. Now they're saying, no, he's not even that. So I think the issue is to love the First Amendment, do all we can to protect it. And the First Amendment was especially designed to protect debating that was unpopular. So we're supposed to have debates. We're supposed to be able to present our ideas and then hear the other side. That's why we have the First Amendment. So we need to work to make sure it's protected and that it comes back to life on these university campuses.
You know, it's odd. Richard Dawkins seems all over the place lately because he's also pointed out that he'd much rather live in a Christian society than a Muslim society for obvious reasons. Yet, on the other hand, he says there is no right or wrong. There is no justice. We all just dance to our DNA. You know, we dance to its music. In other words, we're just molecular machines. We're just moist robots. Yet, on the other hand, then he uses language, moral language, saying, well, Jesus is wrong if he said this or said that. I mean, he's all over the map.
Well, in this clip, I felt bad for him, too, because he's sitting there. He doesn't even have his shirt fully buttoned. Is missing a button, and he just looks a little bit old. And then he starts going on about how he won't debate William Lane Craig. And so you're thinking, okay, this must be some good reason. The reason he gives is that William Lane Craig speaks loudly and he clarifies his premises. He'll say premise 1, deduction 2. And that's literally what Richard Dawkins says I won't debate him over. And I'm thinking to myself, if your debate partner does that, that's a really good thing, because a lot of times in a debate, you got to go fishing for what exactly is your premise. So he's giving it to you. And Richard Dawkins lays that out. So I think this is the thought leader of the new atheists.
Well, Alex O'Connor, I like Alex. I've had a conversation with him in London. That was a number of years ago. It's on YouTube. And he I seems to at least be investigating this with an open mind. I think has probably moved off of atheism. He's more in the agnostic world now.
Yeah, that's right.
He's much younger, of course, so maybe he'll be a better representative of the non-belief world than Richard Dawkins has been, because Richard Dawkins is just contradictory. I mean, and he can't ground his worldview anywhere. That's part of the problem. But let's get back to this this hate speech situation. It's not only big, obviously, in Germany and on CBS News, but it's actually come to ASU. You sent me recently a article that you just wrote, and we'll put it in the show notes. It's called "Free Speech for Me, but Not for Thee. ASU professors attack family values literally." What is this all about?
And I put literally in scare quotes because I'm responding to an open letter that a large number of ASU faculty and graduate students signed to protest a talk that was being given at ASU by Mary Rice Hasen, who's a Catholic scholar. And her talk was not about marriage, but in the past, she's written in support of Christian marriage and about the problems with the trans philosophy. John Money and the trans surgery that he invented, the gender studies idea that he invented. So this letter was about her views on the trans philosophy. And what it said that stood out to me was that she is literally, quote unquote, putting the lives of trans people at risk. And of course she's not doing that. She's disagreeing with them. And no one ever had their life at risk by having someone disagree with them. And I would even argue that she is showing them a great amount of love. Because to say to somebody, I think you're harming yourself, I think this will end up with your own ruin, is not hatred, that's love. But they don't view it that way. They view anybody who disagrees with them as hating them. And it's very important that they're going from not just hate speech, because technically hate speech is protected. They're saying this involves an imminent physical risk. That's what's not protected. That's the fire in a crowded theater example. You can't incite to immediate physical harm to other people. And so they're claiming she does that simply because she believes in the Christian view of man and woman.
So this lady was invited to speak at ASU. A whole group of ASU faculty members got together, wrote this letter. Who did they write the letter to in protest?
It was an open letter. I think it was published in our student paper or something.
Okay. And you write in the article that she's not even coming to talk about marriage. What was the topic of her talk?
You know, it was something about American institutions. It was at our Center for American Institutions, which is a really good center at ASU. And it scares our left-leaning professors, which is silly because it has 2 professors. So, you know, we might have 80 history professors who say that there's this huge conservative takeover of ASU by the Center of American Institutions with its 2 professors. And they're both great guys, but they're nowhere close to taking over ASU for conservative values. So she came to speak at that in favor of American institutions. But she's a Catholic. And so she holds the view you and I would agree with about male and female as well from Genesis. And that's enough to be called literally putting people's lives in danger. So that means that they're trying to get the First Amendment used against us by saying This is the part of speech not protected. You can't incite to violence.
Well, here's what a part of the letter says. They say such an event is dangerous at this time, vilifying the humanity of our trans siblings and the LGBTQ plus population in general only amplifies the anti-trans and LGBTQ plus actions currently taking place in Arizona and the country overall. Okay, so she's having a talk where she says it's not a good idea to mutilate your body. It's not a good idea.
Castration and amputating healthy parts of your body are not the way to solve gender dysphoria.
And that's what the data show as well. It's not just a religious viewpoint. It shows that when people try this, the vast majority of them later regret it. And the suicide rate for people that do get the so-called surgery 10 years after the surgery itself, they have a suicide rate 19 times higher than the general public. And this lady is coming and warning people about this. And these ASU professors say that she is vilifying the humanity of these people. How so?
Yeah, that's where they make that there's a direct contradiction in their philosophy, because they tell us gender is changeable. You can go from male to female or female to male. But then they also want you to believe that it's an unchangeable part of their nature, just like skin color. Well, you can't have it both ways. So telling somebody this is not the right way to deal with gender dysphoria is not hatred. It's not vilifying. It's upholding their humanity and showing them you care about them. But it's a very important strategy because it's going to be used, and it has been used, to try to silence Christians. And parents and potential students need to know this is what you're going to encounter from these kinds of faculty members.
Yeah, they say that the lives of LGBTQ plus youth and people are literally at stake at this moment in history.
Yep.
How
Well,
so?
Yeah,
How
right
so?
after the election in November, I got a faculty-wide email talking about how now that this election's happened, we know that our trans students' lives are at risk. And I just thought to myself, what happened that puts their lives at risk? Their choices might be questioned. They might get a more healthy option for dealing with gender dysphoria, but no one's lives are at risk.
How did they come to these conclusions, Owen? What is this groupthink that goes on that causes university professors to sign this kind of bilge?
Yeah, well, I've wondered that myself, because in some ways they're very smart people. And so you have to think there's this division in them where they can be talented or smart in one sense, but they simply can't see very obvious contradictions in another sense because they're so worked up about this political philosophy. They'll believe anything to protect that political philosophy.
All right, hold the thought. We're going to come back right after the break. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, on the American Family Radio Network. We're on with Owen Anderson from Arizona State University. Don't go anywhere. Back in 2. Welcome back to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turek, on the American Family Radio Network. This weekend, the 23rd of February, Lord willing, I'll be at Revival Christian Fellowship in Menifee, California. That's an hour or so south of Ontario, between Ontario and on your way down towards San Diego. 3 services in the morning, and then 6 o'clock at night. We'll take questions. 6 o'clock at night, we're talking about, does science conflict with Christianity? And that's going to be a fun discussion and hopefully fun Q&A. So I hope to see you all there. We're working on rescheduling our event at William and Mary. It got postponed, the one we were supposed to have on Thursday, because of snow. This is the second event this semester that snow has interfered with our college events. But hopefully the next one will be in the next couple of weeks, and we'll let you know about it. So keep an eye on that. Also keep an eye on the fact that we have online CIA coming up. And if you want to be a part of that, you need to sign up soon, because you're going to learn from not only myself, but Greg Kokel, Elisa Childers, Natasha Crane. We will be your live instructors for presentations you're going to do for us. You'll also get the benefit of many other instructors through video. So check all that out. We're also going to be starting the Great Book of Romans online course. I'll be your instructor for that. Go to online, easy for me to say, crossexamine.org. Click on online courses. You'll see it there. Let me go back to my guest, Dr. Owen Anderson from Arizona State University. Owen, before I forget, tell our listeners your website and where you write and your social media handles and all that, so people can connect with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I try to keep it consistent. Dr. Owen Anderson, drowenanderson.com, or same thing, Dr. Owen Anderson on YouTube. My Substack is Dr. Owen Anderson. Now, my Substack's mostly dedicated to just this kind of updates about ASU and discrimination against Christians at ASU. I do a lot more broad topics over at Twitter or X, where I'm also Dr. Owen Anderson. So yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about ASU right now is we have a required class. Every undergraduate has to take this required class on sustainability. Now, when you first hear sustainability, you might think, okay, I mean, maybe I do or don't agree about global warming, but recycling's good. We want to be good stewards of what we have. Well, that's not what it's about. It's still about social justice and DEI. It has modules about how environmentalism is helping marginalized communities against white racism. And so they still get this whole idea in there of DEI philosophy. And now it's to every single student. Every single student has to take this class.
And this is something that was in place prior to the election and is still in place now, because
it's still in place right now. We'll see. I've been posting on my Substack about places on ASU's website where it's clearly still DEI. They haven't taken it down. And what's surprising is people usually think it's just the crazy humanities. And it is true. The humanities are pretty much off the wall these days. But I'm posting on there about how ASU's STEM is invested in DEI. ASU's engineering college is invested in DEI. What is it doing in those subjects?
Well, apparently, you can build a bridge any way you want if DEI is correct, right? Everyone has to have an equal shot at designing a bridge, right? Doesn't matter what their qualifications are. It just matters what color they are, what their sexual orientation is. Owen, come on, get with the program.
Yeah, I'm old-fashioned, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I mean...
Well, that's what's scary is you're right, because the students today will be the ones building bridges in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. You're asking, why is that the issue? A place like ASU is already inclusive. What that means is, as long as you meet minimum requirements, you'll get into ASU. They don't check anything else. So there's no reason to have additional philosophies about DEI. We already do that. The only reason to have that is what it really means is we're going to take resources from one group based on their skin color and give those resources to another group based on their skin color. And that's the definition of racism.
Yeah, you don't fight old racism with new racism. And tragically, what this does for real minorities is it makes people suspect of their accomplishments. In other words, people are thinking, you're the DEI hire. It's like that person could be totally qualified, but other folks are going, I know why that guy got hired or that gal got hired.
Well, and that's the thing. You don't even need that at ASU. You'll get admitted. Nothing's going to keep you out of ASU. That's a joke about ASU. We've been on The Simpsons, and Henry Kissinger himself made that joke. Both those places made that joke about ASU. So there's no worries that ASU will be inclusive. But what's interesting about saying a DEI hire is I thought that was good. Like, I thought DEI is a good thing, but if you said to someone you're a DEI hire, that's considered an insult. And I haven't yet figured that one out. That seems like a contradiction also.
Well, let's talk about emotional violence, because in your Substack piece about this woman coming to speak at ASU and the faculty opposing it, you draw a distinction between physical violence and emotional violence. What is that?
Yeah, well, I think I'm reminding people about the old saying. I remember when I was little, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. If the biggest problem you have in life is that someone says to you, I disagree with you, you've got a pretty good life, because life's got a lot of hardships in it. And people disagreeing with you really isn't one of them. You need to be a lot tougher than that. So the idea that you're emotionally hurt because a Christian says, I care about you and I want you to accept the gospel, man, you must have it easy, because that's not a very hard or difficult thing to face. So yeah, the idea that emotional hardship, which comes from just being disagreed with. Now, let's say there is something called emotional abuse, and someone could be an emotionally abusive person to you, just like there is physical abuse. But saying that philosophical disagreements counts as emotional abuse, I think it actually waters down what real emotional abuse is.
Yeah, I think it does as well. And the problem is that it seems like this predominantly comes from the left, Owen. And that is, if you disagree with me, you might push me to suicide. I don't see that coming from the right. I don't see Christians, conservative Christians, saying, man, if you folks disagree with me, I may commit suicide. How is it that people are so fragile that they have to have everybody else agree with them in order for them to feel secure in what they believe and in order for them to go on? Oh, any disagreement's going to drive me to suicide. This seems to me, and from the studies I've read, that this whole transgender issue in particular is a mental health crisis that isn't just about transgenderism. In other words, a majority of people that have gender dysphoria have some other mental health issue, some other issue, anxiety, some other problem that is causing them to be so insecure in who they are that their psyche is so fragile that they can't tolerate anyone disagreeing with them.
Well, right. And that's actually emotionally abusive. For me to say, Frank, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to kill myself. I'm emotionally abusing you at that point. That's not right. But that's exactly what happens. And a lot of Christian parents have been pulled into that. And that they'll be told it'd be better to have, what's the saying? It'd be better to have a living Alexa than a dead Alex.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that they're emotionally blackmailed. If you don't go through with this gender transition of your 14-year-old, that child's going to kill herself. So you might as well have a living Alex rather than a dead Alexa. That's what they'll say, which is just emotional blackmail. And it isn't true. Because if that person, that 14-year-old is that fragile, they've got other problems going on. It's not just that they think they're in the wrong gender. They need help. They need psychological help.
A gender surgery, chemical castration is not the help they need, but they definitely need help if they're using that threat. And I think in one way, though, it comes back to all of us before God, because God has to tell all of us, you've sinned, and there are consequences of sin. The wages of sin is death. And we either submit to that, we say, yes, that's true, I need Christ, or we say, God, you're wrong about that. And so I see this as part of a larger strategy to try to take away the sting of sin and say, I'm not going to feel bad about it, and if you tell me I should, you're the one who's wrong.
You know, Michael Knowles, who's with the Daily Wire, just was on that Jubilee YouTube channel. I don't know if you've seen that. That's where one person argues with 25 people. Yeah. All right. And he had some.
When are you going on there?
Well, we're working on that. I might go on there at some point. But there was a man dressed as a woman who looked like he was 6'4" and a linebacker, basically. And he was trying to argue with Michael Knowles, and Michael Knowles was calmly pointing out the proper position on what gender is and how you can't change your gender and all this. And he made the point, which I think is a valid point in a conversation he had with Charlie Kirk on Charlie's show, was, and this comes really from Romans 1, that sin darkens the mind. That, you know, Paul talks about this in Romans 1. If you easy for me to say, if you suppress the truth long enough, God will give you over to futile thinking and ultimately a depraved mind. Now, people get insulted when you say that, but I think it's true. And ladies and gentlemen, think about your own experience. Just, it might be you, it might be somebody you know. Do you know anybody right now who is in sexual sin? Do you know somebody like that? And you're like, look at him and you go, why are you doing this with this guy? Or why are you doing this with this girl? You know this person isn't good for you, but they're blind to it. Have you guys had that experience, maybe personally or people you know? It darkens the mind. People need help.
And you were asking earlier about how can a professor do this? And I think that's the same answer. We're told that the wisdom of the world is actually foolishness. And so God does hand over even the intellectuals, even the philosophers, which might surprise us, but we're told this. He hands them over to that same darkened mind so that they count themselves wise, but they're actually foolish. And if you look at what the two sides are saying, you'll have one side who's saying we should try to live a life that pleases God, to be holy. And then on the other side, you have people saying, and I don't even want to talk about what they are, these sexual acts are good things for you. And they're so vile that we can't even talk about them on your show. I'd be embarrassed to. The two sides are about as different as you can get. It's not as if we're arguing between Presbyterians and Lutherans or something.
Right. Well, when they say good though, Owen, what do they mean by good?
Well, they mean not just that it's an acceptable thing. It's not a libertarian view anymore that says keep your business out of other people's bedrooms. They mean it's actually good to commit these sexual acts.
Good to what end?
We had an event at ASU in the fall about the benefits of polyamory. So not even just monogamous homosexuality, we're beyond that. The benefits of polyamory. And it was sponsored by our humanities program, which is supposed to be asking the deep humanities questions for ASU. And that was one of their deep questions.
But when they say benefits, they're assuming some sort of standard that would define an outcome as a benefit. So when we come back from the break, we'll touch on that. And then I want to get into Jesus, because Jesus would be put in prison certainly in Germany, for some of the things he said, because he directly insulted people on several occasions. Should we then, as Christians, we'll unpack that a little bit right after the break. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with me, Frank Turk, my guest, Dr. Owen Anderson from Arizona State University. Much more in our final segment. Don't go anywhere. What is hate speech? Is it ever wrong to insult people? Or maybe is it ever right to insult people? Because Jesus apparently did it quite a bit. We're going to talk about that in a minute with my guest, Dr. Owen Anderson from Arizona State University. But Owen, I want to close the loop on what we talked about in the first two segments, and that is this woman that came to speak at ASU, and she was opposed by many of the folks on the faculty at ASU because they thought that what she was going to say was somehow hateful and maybe even literally harmful to the LGBTQ community. What actually happened with her talk?
So what I heard was they had to move it for security reasons. They were worried that there might be some kind of threat. Threats were made that this person shouldn't be allowed to talk. And that's what's interesting to me is this woman was accused of literally harming trans people, which she's never done. But then
was not advocating for that.
Not advocating
obviously.
For that. Just saying, I believe God made us male and female, and it's not healthy to have a trans surgery to correct gender dysphoria. Well, they had to move it because of threats. And that usually is what I find in my experience, is that it's not the conservatives who do that kind of thing, who burn down cities or riot and flip over cars, but it's the radical left who does that to try to shut down free speech.
That's cancel culture. We can't win the debate, so we're going to cancel it. I found that those who say they're fighting for inclusion, tolerance, and diversity are normally not very inclusive, not very diverse, and they're not tolerant at all. Isn't it ironic that these very people who are claiming they're the ones who are going to be the victims of violence are the ones who are actually threatening the violence?
Yep. It's really not surprising in the sense that that's what I live with. That's what it's like to be a professor at a state university. You just have to get used to it. But what I'm not okay with is letting parents or students be tricked or fooled into thinking this is a place where you're going to be able to ask the big questions and just have objective studies and objective debates. That doesn't happen. You get a specific philosophy pushed at you in these classes. And you know that I'm involved in a lawsuit right now against ASU for its employee required DEI training. And so this is now federally illegal also, but we started this a year and a half ago because of it violating state law. Arizona law prohibits public classrooms or public education from teaching race blame. And the required training does just that. It says you can tell if someone is privileged based on their skin color, namely if they're white. And so that's as clear as it gets. But ASU has been, of course, trying to get out of the lawsuit by doing different things. Right now, we're involved in an appeal because ASU says, I don't even have standing to bring the case based on the wording of the law. Well, what we got on our side was an amicus brief from the two legislators in ASU who wrote the law. And they said in their brief, we wrote this law just for someone like Professor Anderson. So he certainly has standing.
So where does it stand right now?
We're at the appeals level. So
Okay.
they submitted their paper, we submitted our argument, and now we have to wait and see if the appeals court could simply say we're not taking it. And that drops it down to lower court where we actually get to go to court. And that's going to be the fun part, because we're going to get ASU administrators under oath. What ASU's been saying so far is the training doesn't exist, and the training that doesn't exist doesn't use race blame. So you can't have it both ways. It can't not exist and it doesn't use race blame. Now their problem is I have screenshots. I have screen recordings. I've got a recording that shows where it says required. So it certainly does exist. And I have pictures of the content that shows it using race blame about white skin. So there's no doubt about that. So there's always, in law, there's always these other twists and turns they'll try to do to get out of it. But I think that's going to be the exciting point, is when we have ASU administrators under oath.
Well, make sure whenever that change comes down, whatever progresses on this case, you let me know and we'll bring you back on to talk about it.
Yeah, I will, for sure.
And our viewers and listeners can pray the proper outcome, which should not be racism. The proper outcome should be, let's treat people based on their merits. But I want to spend a little bit of time, if we can, Dr. Anderson, on insults. And when I saw that piece that we played on the top of the program from 60 Minutes about these German bureaucrats actually arresting people for saying what they considered to be insults, either online or in person. I thought of Jesus, and I did some searching online. Turns out a pastor compiled all of the insults that Jesus apparently these are insults, they appear to be insults, spoke to people in his presence when he was here on earth, and he came up with 78 of them. And we're going to put all this in the show notes so you can see them. Let me just read a few of them. This is just from the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 6:2, he calls the Pharisees hypocrites. Same thing in 6:5, same thing in 6:16, same thing in 7:5, in 7:6. He calls them dogs. In 7:6, pigs, ravenous wolves. In fact, I won't give you I won't give you the citations anymore. I'll just read the insults through the Gospel of Matthew. Workers of lawlessness, ye of little faith. He equates whole Jewish towns with Sodom and Gomorrah. He says the current cities are worse than the Baal-worshipping cities of Tyre and Sidon. He says Capernaum is worse than Sodom. He calls people brood of vipers. He calls them an evil and adulterous generation. He says this generation's worse than Nineveh. He says this evil generation is akin to being demon-possessed. And he goes on and on. He calls them blind guides and dogs and an adulterous generation. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. And we could spend the next 10 minutes going through all these what appear to be insults. What say you, Owen? Would Jesus be thrown into prison in Germany? Number one. And if Jesus can insult people, can Christians?
Yeah, well, he's not being very Christ-like, is he? So, yes, it's true. And, that's one interesting thing about Bertrand Russell's book, Why I'm Not a Christian, because he pointed this out, 100 years ago. He said, the liberal Protestant tries to say Jesus is just this nice moral teacher. And what Russell says is we need to reject the whole thing. He's not the eternal Son of God, and he's also not just a nice moral teacher. He says things like this. And I think that's a better approach by the atheist than the kind of liberal, I want to walk the line. He's not God, but he's also just a nice person. So I think he would definitely be in trouble in Germany. And it goes back to the sin issue that you and I spoke about in a previous segment, that these are all cases where he's saying you're in sin. And then they're doubling down and hardening their heart. And that's usually when he says something like that with brood of vipers. And so that's actually love on his part. We always hear insults, it seems like in our day, as something where they don't love you, but he's calling them back to life with God, which is the highest possible good.
And most of these people he's going after, as I look at them, most of them are the righteous, religious people. Yep. Right?
I think in our day, and so your audience doesn't hear that as if religious people in our day, we go to church. I think that's our equivalent of the woke crowd. They're self-righteous. They virtue signal. That's what Pharisees did. They wanted you to see them praying. They wanted you to see their virtues. And so that's the leftist professor today, someone who wants you to believe that they are doing all the right things.
Yeah, and advisedly, if we are to use insults or mockery, we have to be very sure that what we're doing is true and right. We can't be cavalier about it. On the other hand, Jesus was very clear that he did use mockery. He did use insults. And for us to think that Jesus was just a nice guy all the time and he would never say a bad word about anyone, If you think that, you have not read the Gospels. You have not read the history of what Jesus said and did. And so it's interesting when you unpack all this and you go, wow, I think we have the wrong Jesus in our minds sometimes.
We invented our own. I think the Babylon Bee has a clip on the woke Jesus.
Oh, yeah, so that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's what we've done is we haven't read the gospel. We just invented who we want. But here's why it's so important. Jesus is operating in the context of spiritual war. There's good and there's evil. And you need to learn to discern the difference and call them each for what they are. Whereas in our day, the liberal left has no such things. There's just you do you. Be whatever you want. And so the idea of having standards and holding to those boundaries is hate speech.
Well, that's what they say. Yeah. The problem is they have no standard. If they're going to reject Jesus and reject God, they have no standard. And yet they're claiming that somehow we're wrong for believing what the Bible says.
Yep.
And I think that humor and mockery and even insults properly done can be very effective and can wake people up. And that's what the Babylon Bee is so good at.
Yep.
Because they can say something that if you were to say it, not in a humorous way, but in a direct way, it wouldn't be taken as well.
Yeah.
But
you have a skit with Satan telling the Democrats to tone it down.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you Democrats have gone too far. You're even making me look bad, right? Yeah. They have this skit in that same skit, the woke Jesus. Jesus says, you have to be kind to everyone except the people you disagree with. You need to hammer them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You need to completely destroy them if they're conservatives, especially.
Well, and I think that's one thing that I've had to tell parents is I've sat in faculty meetings where professors talk about how they enjoy destroying the faith of young Christians. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to tell you that on parent visitation day. They're going to tell you about how great their program is. But you need to know what the professors actually think of Christianity. It's not just one of the views. They dislike it, and they don't want there to be Christians.
Yeah, they dislike it. Why do you think they dislike it, Owen?
Well, I found a couple reasons besides the darkened mind thing that we already talked about. Many of them were raised Christians, and they've left it, and they have a real contempt for their own upbringing. Others of them were raised just adamant Marxists. They may have had atheist parents, and so they view it as part of the international march of the people to get rid of ancient superstitions, which is all Christianity is. So I've talked to both. They tend to be one of those two, and I've talked to both of them, and they have different problems with Christianity.
I think there's also a moral accountability issue that a lot of people don't like. That's why I asked them, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And so many times they say no, because they don't want it to be true. Yeah, they want to go their own way. Oh, and we're about out of time. Sorry, we're about out of time. Give people your website again. So
so drdrowenanderson.com or Dr. Owen Anderson on YouTube and Substack and X.
Oh, and it's always a pleasure. These discussions go so quickly, but we're going to put your stuff in the show notes too, so people can check up and keep me informed as to what happens with your lawsuit.
Yeah, I will for sure. Thank you.
That's Dr. Owen Anderson, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget the CIA program coming up, the online CIA, also online, the Great Book of Romans. And I'll be in Menifee, California. Hope to see you there this Sunday, February 23rd. Check our website for more, crossexamined.org. Hope to see you here next week, Lord willing.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.